Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today's topic is poison mouse. We will be talking about devaluation. Many people treat devaluation as something minor, thinking, well, so what if someone devalued something? It may seem that nothing terrible has happened, but if we start to pull on this thread of devaluation and trace its consequences, I hope that you will be as appalled as I am. There is something demonic in devaluation, because when we devalue, we destroy meaning. That is, an object, for example, a cup from which we could drink has value, it has a purpose, a meaning. But a broken cup turns into a pile of shards. Devaluation works in exactly the same way. It deprives a certain whole object of its meaning, breaking it into fragments. And when someone picks up one of these fragments from the floor, another person says, it's just a shard. There's no meaning in it. Sometimes I observe how people speak, whether on public transport or in various social settings, and I notice just how much devaluation there is among us, among people. For example, spouses often devalue their partners, and both men and women do this because the husband or wife did not live up to expectations. They are not the way they should be. They are somehow wrong. Or when friends discuss each other behind their backs, they might even express pity or lament. Well, yes, he's a decent person, but his personal life just didn't work out. Or, well, he doesn't have much money. Or, well, he's a bit overweight. And devaluation is already happening, but the person seems to feel sorry. He seems good, and they even appear to feel sorry for this imperfect other person. We can observe exactly the same kind of devaluation when subordinates talk about their bosses. Bosses are always doing the wrong thing and could be smarter. Their assignments are considered foolish. At the same time, bosses describe their employees as lazy, not very smart, and so on. So when we talk about devaluation, it might seem like just some minor devaluation. But when we start to look closely, we see that it is in fact everywhere. It is pervasive. Even on social media, when someone tries to speak critically about another person, it is present. And devaluation gives a person a remarkable opportunity. It's as if a person builds a kind of pedestal out of these skulls or bones, those who have been devalued, and climbs up it from some internal pit. In other words, we are saying that devaluation is in some way vitally necessary for a person. And if you begin to examine devaluation, you will see that it is characteristic of people who experience a certain dissatisfaction, a sense of unfulfillment, those who have not been able to achieve what they desire. And a person, for example, who encounters difficulties, that is, when their life situation worsens, will, for some reason, start to devalue others even more, because the pit in which they find themselves, unfortunately, grows even deeper. This is especially true for people who once rose in social status and then suddenly fell, or they had talent or success and then fell, or they had a family and now they don't. And so devaluation of everything begins in order to boost their self-esteem. And if a person does not notice this, devaluation starts to completely consume them. So what exactly is this devaluation? When we say devaluation, we are really talking about value, about a price. That is, before this, there is an act of evaluation. And what is a price? A price is a certain equivalent of something for which we can acquire benefits. In other words, I can acquire more or fewer benefits for what I give outwardly. And this kind of evaluation on a primal level is really about not being worse than others. For example, when I'm among 50-year-old women, It's easier for me to feel like I fit in. That is, potentially, I might be chosen, or I might have a higher status there than in a group of 30-year-old women. You see, this point is important here, not to be worse. In other words, ideally, I should be better. At the beginning of this video, I gave examples like a husband devaluing his wife, or the wife doing the same to him. That is, at that moment, he enters into a kind of competition with her. The two spouses compete with each other, and often this competition goes unnoticed because it is perceived as something else. For example, spouses may start arguing or blaming each other, each feeling like they're the one making all the sacrifices. Each feels they're doing more for the family and the other less. That's where the competition begins. They compete over who suffers more. They compare who tries harder. They compare who contributes more to the family. Exactly the same kind of comparison happens between friends, as we discussed earlier. Who among us is better? Who among us is more successful? And if you are more successful, for example, in business, then I will downplay your achievements and bring you down to my level. Or, for example, if things are better for me in my family life, I will instantly, after devaluing your professional achievements, feel that I am better simply because I have a family and you do not. Or when a subordinate feels inferior because someone is in charge of them. And so by devaluing the manager and searching for flaws, the subordinate lowers them below the level of family. So what if you are a boss? Through devaluation, I will pull you down to the level where I stand. There is an enormous amount of devaluation from children toward their parents, because parents were always lacking, always not quite right, always wrong in some way. And they were supposed to, it's as if we can't too. We feel we have the greatest right to make demands of our parents. They gave birth to us, and that's it. They must. Parents do the same. They blame their children for disappointing them or not living up to expectations. I invested so much. You see, there is always this kind of competition. Which of us is more virtuous? Who is better? Who has done more? Who has suffered more? As a parent, I suffered because you let me down. Or I, as a child to whom the parent did not give something, and now I am forced to suffer because of it. When we talk about this better, worse dynamic, about this competition where our devaluation originates, it is important to remember that the beast within us is very concerned with occupying a dominant position. And it is very easy to take this dominant position, especially in our own minds. That is, when we are in direct communication and try to devalue another person, they will begin to defend themselves and may even make counterclaims against us. But in our minds, nothing stops us. In our minds, we can reduce anyone to nothing. We can find their flaws, nurture those flaws, and exaggerate them. And this poison mouth, even if it's silent, just in the mind feels like spitting lumps of dirt, or like a wild animal dragging someone into its den and covering them in its own filth. They smear the other person their face, like in fairy tales where girls are blackened with soot, so they won't be seen as beautiful. So if I put myself at the center of the universe, I'll constantly be worried, always comparing, am I better or worse, worse or better? And it turns out that this I, my idea of how I should be, becomes the measure of everything. So now we are getting to the very essence of devaluation. Even the devaluation of oneself, when I compare, when I judge whether it's others or myself, I'm forced to deliver a verdict, to decide who's better and who's worse. I am worse, the other is worse. I am better, the other is better. And even if the other is better, let's say I admit it, but it already feels like these are facts that I cannot argue with. And so if the other is better, then I'm worse. do you see? Then I start to devalue myself. I start to tear into myself. I think each of you has experienced moments of failure or stress when there is an attack on yourself, self-aggression, and you begin, as I mentioned at the beginning, like in the video, you break a cup, meaning you shatter your own personality and turn yourself into a meaningless shard that means nothing, that has no purpose. And you keep breaking that shard into even smaller pieces, stripping yourself of meaning even further. But if we find another victim, someone else, for example, when we go to bed and certain events from our lives start to surface, we might choose someone else and start tearing into them instead of ourselves. So you see, devaluation is that poison mouth and that poison gaze when a person sees the world through bitterness and speaks with venom. I think each of you has experienced this sense of toxicity when being around people who devalue others. It's like someone throws mud and you start to feel dirty. They build up poison inside and eventually they have to get rid of it, to throw it at someone to get it out of themselves. So this generation of darkness, if it is not poured out onto others, it will be poured out onto oneself. What makes devaluation dangerous? Why is it a bad habit? Because a person who devalues others cannot grow or develop. Our development, as I mentioned not long ago, can be animalistic when we need to be better, or human when we strive to evolve as consciousness, as a personality. And this desire to evolve, this hunger for evolution, can very easily be stifled by devaluation. In other words, why should I bother to evolve if I can simply devalue others and feel superior? I am feeding this hunger with fast food, a quick boost to my self-esteem at the expense of devaluing others. People who devalue others stop growing. They don't even feel that inner hunger anymore. And even if they feel it, they can't stand it for long. They start devaluing themselves. At that point, they look for someone who is worse off, someone with whom they can compete, find flaws, point them out, assert themselves, satisfy this hunger, and then it no longer torments them. And many talented people who, for various reasons, find themselves in crisis because they begin to devalue, it's like becoming addicted to a drug, getting hooked on this needle, are unable to get out of this crisis because instead of dealing with their inner world, they are constantly engaged in devaluation. This issue of devaluation concerns me deeply because I see how it is not recognized in people's consciousness, how they destroy themselves, undermine their potential, waste their life energy, become toxic to themselves and others, and do not even notice it. Because devaluation goes by many names, but in essence, it remains the same. And that's exactly why I keep coming back to this topic, because it touches something essential. Because non-judgment, on the contrary, is a way out of a crisis. Whereas devaluation is a pseudo solution to any crisis. In the end, it just keeps you stuck. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, I'd like to ask you to write in the comments, what do you usually devalue? Try to identify this and ask yourself, what exactly do you feel you're missing? And why do you believe it's something you absolutely need? Why are you fighting for it so hard? And with that, I say goodbye until next time.